My brother's fiancée smirked. "Oh, you're just the backup plan in case his real job falls through," as she twirled the diamond ring I paid for. The room erupted in laughter except me. I quietly slid my business card back into my wallet. That night, I called my accountant, transferred my assets, and left the family group chat. A week later, she opened an envelope with her name on it. Inside, she found. The conversation hit an awkward lull, the kind that usually happens right after a bad joke. We were crowded around Megan's parents' massive oak table, the kind that probably cost more than my first truck, with a chandelier hanging over it like an expensive menace. The plates were oversized, the wine glasses unnecessarily tall, and the conversation carefully curated to sound polite, but never personal. I'd barely finished slicing into my overcooked steak when Megan decided to strike. She leaned back, her manicured fingers idly turning the diamond ring on her hand, the one I bought, even though Luke took the credit. It had cost me $12,000, a favor my brother had practically begged for because Megan had pressed him for a ring that actually sparkles. I'd given in against my better judgment, thinking I was just helping him buy some peace. "Oh, Nathan's just a backup plan," she said, her voice cutting through the clatter of silverware. She glanced at her mom, then at her dad, whose face immediately broke into a wide, toothy grin. In case Luke's real job doesn't work out. Her dad let out a booming laugh and slammed his hand down on the table like a judge announcing a verdict. Her mom, already 2 glasses deep, leaned in to clink hers against his, both of them grinning like they just heard the joke of the decade. Even Megan's little sister, who had barely looked up from her phone all night, cracked a smile, the glow of her screen reflecting off her perfectly straight teeth. Luke, sitting next to me, just went pale. I saw his fingers tighten around his fork, his jaw working like he was grinding his teeth. He managed a weak, shaky chuckle, the kind you give when you're cornered, but his eyes remained glued to his plate. I felt my own jaw clench, my pulse quicken, my fingers brushed against my wallet, where the crisp business card I'd brought was waiting. I'd planned to offer it to Megan's father, a deal that would have given him a discount on the logistics of his small fleet and cut his operating costs by 15%. It would have been a favor, really a chance to pull his business out of the slow financial spiral I'd heard about through mutual contacts. But now I let my hands slowly slide back, shoving the card deeper into my pocket. I just sat there, my face carefully blank as I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the bitter taste drown out the bow rising in my throat. After dinner, I made my excuses and ducked out before dessert, ignoring the confused look Luke shot at me as I grabbed my keys. I drove back to my hotel, the quiet hum of the engine giving me time to think. When I got back, I didn't waste a second. First, I called my accountant and told him to freeze some accounts and move some assets. Then, I pulled out my phone and canceled the joint card I'd foolishly let Luke use for emergencies. I even dropped a quiet message to my lawyer, making sure everything was in place to protect my business if the situation blew up as I suspected it would. Finally, with a grim smile, I tapped into the family group chat, the same one where Megan had started dropping not-so-subtle hints about honeymoon spots and destination weddings, all with price tags that made my head hurt. With a flick of my thumb, I left the group. The little Nathan has left the chat. Message more satisfying than I expected. A week later, Megan opened the envelope with her name on it. Inside the envelope, Megan found a single neatly typed letter on thick cream-colored paper. It was an invoice. I'd itemized everything, the ring, the expenses, even the down payment on the beach house they'd booked for their honeymoon. I knew she'd be furious, but I also knew Megan was the type who couldn't resist opening mail with her name on it, even if it looked suspicious. At the bottom, I'd included a line that read, "Effective immediately. The joint card has been closed. Please pay the balance within 30 days. Failure to do so will result in legal action." I could almost see her perfectly manicured nails digging into the paper, her face contorting in that special kind of shock that people like her reserve for the first time they are told no. I didn't hear from her for a few days. Luke sent me a few messages, mostly confused one-liners like, "Hey, did you leave the family chat?" And Megan said the card didn't work. I ignored them. He'd figure it out soon enough. Then on the fourth day, my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was Luke. I hesitated, then hit answer and leaned back in my chair, looking out my office window at the city skyline. "Hey man," he said, his voice tight. I could hear Megan's voice in the background, a sharp, angry hum like a mosquito in his ear. "Did you close the shared card?" I waited a beat. Yes, it was time. He went silent for a moment, probably trying to process the bluntness of my answer. "What's going on, Nathan?" "Megan's freaking out. She said you sent her some kind of bill." I leaned forward, tapping my fingers on the edge of my desk. I did. I figured it was time to get something straightened out. There was a long pause, the kind that stretches thin and uncomfortable. I could hear Megan in the background, her voice rising like a storm. She was obviously not used to being cut off. "Look," I continued, breaking his silence. "You asked me to help you with the ring." "I did." "You asked me to pay for the honeymoon deposit." "I did. But I'm not your piggy bank, Luke. I can't keep covering for you just because she has expensive tastes." He took a long, shaky breath. "But you know what she's like, man. She just wants nice things. It's part of who she is." "Yeah, and it's killing you." I shot back, feeling my own temper flare. "When was the last time you bought something for yourself without worrying about how she'd react? You can't keep doing this, and I'm not going to be your financial safety net." There was another period of silence, broken only by Megan's muffled screams in the background. I heard a door slam. Then Luke's voice came back softer, more tense. "Okay, I'll figure it out," he said, his tone finally breaking a little. "Just don't do anything crazy, okay?" I ended the call without another word. I wasn't done, not by a long shot, but I wanted him to feel the weight of his decisions. It was time for him to see Megan for what she really was, and I had a plan to make sure he did. The next punch came at just the right time. I'd been sitting on it for a while, waiting for the right moment to twist the knife, and the opportunity just dropped in my lap a few days later. I got a call from my mom, her voice tight with concern. "Nathan, can you come over this weekend? We need to talk about Luke." I knew what this was about. I'd seen the cracks forming. Luke had been distant, even pulling away from our parents, probably too embarrassed to admit how deep he'd fallen. When I arrived at my parents' house that Saturday, my mom met me at the door, her face wrinkled with worry. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee cup in both hands, staring into the middle distance as if trying to solve a complicated math problem. Mom closed the door behind me. "He called us last night." Sounded off. She hesitated as if searching for the right words. Megan was screaming in the background. "I think they're in trouble, Nathan." I took a deep breath, feeling that familiar anger flare up again. I'd known Megan was a problem, but it was one thing to drag my brother down financially. It was another to make him a shadow of his former self. "All right," I said, setting my keys down on the counter. Time for a little intervention. Later that day, I showed up unannounced at Luke's apartment. He opened the door, looking rough, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his hair a mess. I barely had to push my way in, the door swinging open as he stumbled back, clearly caught off guard. "Hey man, what's up?" he said, forcing a thin, shaky smile. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting to the closed bedroom door. Megan was probably on the other side, planning her next tantrum. I didn't bother with small talk. I grabbed his arm and steered him toward the living room, away from the closed door, lowering my voice. "Luke, we need to talk now." He sank onto the couch, rubbing his face like he was trying to wake up from a bad dream. "About the card, I told you I'd figure it out." I pulled out my phone and swiped to a set of screenshots I had saved for this very moment. I dropped my phone on the coffee table in front of him and let the screen light up with the first image. It was a set of credit card statements, the ones I'd pulled before I cut off the joint card. Luke's eyes went wide as he leaned forward, his face paling with each line he read. Designer bags, spa weekends, VIP concert tickets, all charges he'd never mentioned. "She burned through your money, Luke," I said, my voice deep and sharp. Or should I say my money until I finally shut it down? He stared at the screen, his hands starting to tremble. I didn't know it was that bad. I leaned in, my tone hardening. It is, and it's only going to get worse if you don't get your head out of the sand. She's using you, and if you don't cut it off, you're going to end up broke, divorced, and a shell of yourself before you're 35. He looked like I'd hit him. I almost felt bad, but then I remembered the way Megan had laughed that night, her perfect white teeth flashing as she mocked me to my face, and my sympathy dried up. Luke rubbed his eyes, his voice falling to a raspy whisper. What do I do? I took a deep breath, my hands clenching into fists. First, you're going to cut them off. No more credit cards. No more shopping sprees. You're going to start acting like a damn adult and stop letting her rush out over you. He just nodded, dropping his head into his hands. For a moment, I thought he was going to collapse right there. But then the bedroom door creaked open and Megan stepped out, her eyes narrowing when she saw me. "Oh, Nathan," she said, her voice dripping with fake joy. "I didn't hear you come in." I locked eyes with her and felt my pulse quicken. I gave her a narrow, thin smile. "Oh, I just came in for a little family talk. Thought it was time to clear the air." She froze, her eyes flicking to the phone still glowing on the coffee table. I saw her jaw tighten, her perfectly curated mask slipping for just a second before she forced a sweet plastic smile back onto her face. "Of course," she said, crossing her arms defensively. "Family is everything." She had no idea what came next. Megan paused in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrowed like a cat that had just caught a whiff of something foul. She glanced down at the phone on the coffee table. The glow of the incriminating screenshots reflected in her eyes, and I saw the first crack in her perfect facade. I leaned back, crossed my own arms, and held her gaze without blinking. The tension in the room felt like a coiled spring, and I decided to push a little harder. "Luke and I were just going over some financial stuff," I said, my voice casual as if we were talking about the weather. Megan's lips tightened, her carefully maintained smiles slipping a fraction. "Financial matters," she tried to sound indifferent, but I caught the sharp edge in her tone. "Yes," I said, locking eyes with her. "Like how you've been bleeding him dry with designer bags, spa weekends, and all the little luxuries you've convinced him are part of the good life." She tilted her head, the fake smile stretching a little too far. "That's what people in love do, Nathan. They support each other." I let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Support each other, Megan. You've turned my brother into your personal credit card, and you've run him into the ground. He can barely pay his rent because you're out there treating every store like your own private showroom." Luke's head snapped up, his eyes darting between us, his face pale. I could tell he hadn't put all the pieces together yet, but the shock was starting to break through the fog she shrouded him in. Megan took a slow, deliberate step into the living room, her heels clicking against the hardwood. She straightened, pulled herself up to her full height, and gave me a cold, condescending smile. "You don't get it, Nathan. If you want to keep a woman like me, you have to pay for it. That's just the way it is." I felt my jaw clench, but I forced a slow, mocking grin onto my face. "Oh, I get it, Megan. You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? That you can just keep pushing him, using him, and everything will magically work out." She rolled her eyes, her confidence flickering back. He chose this. He knew what he was getting into. I leaned forward, my tone dropping to a low, cutting whisper. "No, he didn't. But he's about to find out." Megan's eyes narrowed, her carefully sculpted eyebrows drawing together. "What's that supposed to mean?" I straightened, my fingers clenching into fists to keep my temper from getting the better of me. "It means I'm done. I'm done funding your lifestyle. I'm done pretending you're some kind of prize. And I'm done watching my brother drown under the weight of your nonsense." Luke made a small choke sound, his head still buried in his hands. Megan's eyes flickered to him, her face tightening, and for a moment, I saw a flash of real fear in her eyes. She was beginning to realize that she might actually lose control. I let the silence last a second longer, letting her sweat, then took a step back. "You might want to check on your parents, by the way," I said, my tone deliberately casual. "They should be getting a little surprise in the mail soon." Something to remind them that money doesn't just appear out of nowhere. I saw the color drain from her face, her perfectly painted lips parting slightly as the gears in her head began to turn. Without another word, I turned on my heel and headed for the door. I paused just long enough to look back over my shoulder, catching the look of raw panic that had finally broken through her practiced, icy calm. "Oh, and Megan," I added, my hand resting on the doorknob. "Enjoy the last of those credit cards while you can. I'm cutting you off completely. Welcome to the real world." I stepped outside and let the door slam behind me. The cool fall air hit my face, clearing the last of the anger from my mind as I walked to my car. I didn't look back, but I could almost feel the heat of her anger burning through the walls behind me. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of Luke's window, the blind still half closed, his shadows slumped on the couch. I took a deep breath and let the satisfaction settle in my bones. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The fallout hit sooner than I expected. 3 days after my little showdown with Megan, my phone buzzed while I was in the middle of a meeting with my operations manager. I looked at the screen. It was my dad. He usually didn't interrupt me during business hours unless it was something serious. So, I quickly excused myself and stepped into the hallway. "Dad," I said, holding the phone to my ear. His voice came through tight and clipped, the way it always did when he was trying not to lose his temper. "Nathan, you might want to come over to the house. We just had a visit from Megan's parents." I felt a cold, bitter smile creep across my face. "What? They didn't like my little gift?" He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Oh, they liked it about as much as I expected. They stormed in here an hour ago, demanding to know why you were cutting off their future daughter-in-law's support. Their mother almost threw a vase at them." I chuckled, picturing my usually calm, patient mother hurling a ceramic vase at Megan's overly tanned, eternally smug parents. "I'm on my way." When I pulled into my parents' driveway 20 minutes later, I saw Megan's parents' SUV parked at an awkward angle, as if they'd been too angry to bother straightening it. I took a deep breath, letting the cool fall air calm my nerves, then headed for the front door. I found them in the living room. Megan's father, Tom, was pacing the floor like a caged lion, his face a deep, angry red. Her mother, Linda, was perched on the edge of the couch, her fingers curled around her designer purse, as if she were afraid someone might try to take it from her. My mom sat stiffly in her favorite chair, jaw set, arms crossed, while my dad leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching the scene unfold. The second I walked in, Tom's head snapped around, his eyes fixed on me like a hawk spotting a mouse. "You," he spat, jabbing a finger in my direction. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Cutting off Megan's cards and sending us these ridiculous bills?" I let the doors swing shut behind me, taking my time, slipping my phone into my pocket. "Just settling some debts," I said, keeping my tone deliberately calm. "Your daughter has been spending my brother's money like a drunken, and I've decided to stop financing her lifestyle." Linda made a sharp, gasping sound, clutching her pearls in a way that would have been comical if the situation weren't so tense. "She's your future sister-in-law," she snapped, her voice shaking with indignation. "You can't just cut her off like some." She struggled to find the word, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling. "Freeloaders," I offered, raising an eyebrow. "Because that's what she is." Tom took a step closer, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the tendons in his neck straining. "Listen, you little punk," he growled, pointing a thick, callous finger at me. "You don't get to tell my daughter how to live her life. If your brother can't afford her lifestyle, that's his problem, not yours." I felt a flicker of anger, but I forced it down, keeping my expression carefully neutral. "Actually, it's my problem when she uses my money, my connections, and my family's patience to live like a reality TV star." I stepped closer, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm done, Tom. The cards are cut. The joint account is closed. And if your daughter has a problem with that, she can come and talk to me herself instead of sending the two of you to throw a tantrum in my parents' living room." Tom's face darkened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I saw my father shift slightly, his eyes narrowing, ready to intervene if things got physical. But Linda beat him to it, letting out a sharp, angry breath. "You're going to regret this," she snapped, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You think you can just cut her off and walk away? We have connections, Nathan. Powerful friends. You'll pay for this." I smiled and leaned in a little closer. "Bring her," I whispered, my voice deep and cold. "I'd like to see you try." They stared at me for a long moment, their eyes blazing with barely contained rage. And then Tom grabbed his wife by the arm and practically dragged her to the door. I watched them go, the front door slamming behind them with enough force to rattle the picture frames on the wall. For a long moment, the room was silent, the only sound being my mother's slow, steady breathing as she tried to calm herself. Finally, my father let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing. "Well," he said, a hint of a grin, breaking his usually stern expression. "I think that went better than expected." I chuckled, rubbing the back of my neck as the adrenaline started to wear off. "Yeah, but something tells me this isn't over." I glanced out the front window and caught a glimpse of Tom's SUV as it pulled out of the driveway, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. No, this was far from over, and I had a feeling the next round was going to be messy. 2 weeks passed and the silence from Megan was almost too good to be true, but I knew better than to think it would last. People like her don't just disappear. The storm hit on a Wednesday morning. I was in my office halfway through reviewing a new partnership proposal when my phone buzzed with a call from Luke. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. Part of me was tempted to let it go to voicemail, but something told me this was the moment I'd been waiting for. I swiped to accept. "Hey," he said, his voice harsh and strained. I could hear the faint clatter of dishes in the background, like he was in a diner. "Can we meet? I need to talk." I agreed and we settled on a small, quiet bar near my office, the kind of place that didn't ask questions and kept the music low enough for serious conversation. When I walked in, I immediately spotted him. He was slumped in a booth by the window, nursing a half-empty glass of whiskey, his tie loose and his hair a mess. He looked up as I slid into the seat across from him, his bloodshot eyes meeting mine with a mixture of shame and despair. "Megan left," he said, his voice flat as if he still couldn't quite believe it. I raised an eyebrow and sat back. He let out a bitter, shaky laugh, rubbing his hands together. "Yeah. She packed her things 2 nights ago and just walked out. Said she's moving back in with her parents until I get my priorities straight." I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but kept my expression carefully neutral. "And how do you feel about that?" He shook his head, his eyes dropping to the table. "Relieved, I guess. Hurt, angry. I don't even know anymore. It's like a weight has been lifted, but at the same time I feel like an idiot." I nodded slowly, letting him talk, letting him get it all out. She kept saying that I wasn't trying hard enough. He continued, his hands tightening around his glass, that I wasn't ambitious enough, that I didn't care about giving her the life she deserved. But all the while I was just drowning. She was draining my accounts, maxing out my cards, and still acting like I was the problem. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, head in his hands. "I almost proposed, Nathan, like really proposed. I was gonna go through with it." I let that hang in the air for a moment, then leaned in. "But you didn't. That's the important part. You backed out before it was too late." He let out a long, shaky breath, his shoulders slumping. "Yeah. I don't know who I am without her. She made me feel like I needed her, like I was nothing without her." I clenched my jaw, feeling the old anger flare up again. "You don't need her, Luke. You never did. You just forgot who you were for a little while." He looked up, his eyes glassy, and gave me a small, bitter smile. "Yeah, I guess so." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could see the gears turning in his head, the slow realization that he'd spent years of his life tangled up in someone else's web. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart skipped a beat as he slid it across the table, his hand shaking slightly. "I can't keep this," he said, his voice raspy. "I know you pay for it. I'll pay you back. Promise. It may take a while, but I will." I picked up the box, feeling the cool weight of the diamond ring inside. I opened it, letting the overhead lights catch the flawless, sparkling stone. The same ring that had caught Megan's eye, the same one she twirled so arrogantly at her parents' table that night. I closed the box and slipped it into my jacket pocket without a word. "Don't worry about it," I said, my tone flat. "Just focus on rebuilding. You have a second chance, Luke. Don't waste it." He gave a small broken nod, his eyes dropping back to his drink. "Thanks, man, for everything." I just gave him a firm, understanding nod, then stood up and patted him once on the shoulder. "Take care, Luke." As I walked out, I felt the cool weight of the ring pressing against my chest, a sharp, satisfying reminder of everything I just undone. I reached the sidewalk and let the cool fall air wash over me as I put my hands in my pockets, the sharp edges of the ring biting into my palm. I took a deep breath and felt the tension finally melt away. It was over. But just as I reached my car, my phone buzzed again. I glanced down, frowning as I saw the name flash on the screen. Megan. I let it ring for a moment, watching the name flash on and off, the vibration humming in my hand. Then, without a second thought, I hit block and slipped the phone back into my pocket. My jaw set, my heart steady. It was over and I was going to keep it that way.